So can you briefly describe what Zeitgeist is about and its essential message?
The first film or the second film, or the whole project?
The first one, the second one, and the whole thing.
The first film was a treatment on myth, things that were basically elements of society that people think are real, but as you take an objective look back, you see that there's a lot of mythology that occurs. And it's not just mythology in a traditional sense, such as religion, which is the first section of the first film, but the mythology of 9/11, which if you take a strong objective look back, and as difficult as it is, you begin to see that the conspiracy theory that could possibly exist is actually the government's story and not some fringe cult ideology, which is what the government claims. And then the third attribute, which would detail even a more powerful form of myth, which is what's continued in the new film, deals with the monetary system and war and the banking system and things that people kind of take for granted. They don't have a full grasp on. For example, war is usually assumed to be this two countries that essentially can't meet in a civilized manner of some agreement, so they engage in war. But what we tend to find is war is actually a business. If war wasn't a business, they could script in a draft human lives. What they would do if it wasn't a business, they would actually take all the industries and conscript all the industries for no profit ever to be made. They don't do that because war is one of the biggest businesses there are. And they make weapons, so they use them. So keep that in mind. So that's a mythology that people have, this general notion. So I continue the financial system in the new film, and that's the first section of the film. It's in two sections, 4 parts. The first section deals with the monetary system. The first part deals with the fractional reserve lending policy of the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England as well, and goes into the fact that this system is essentially a slavery-producing system because the debt that is created in society is deliberate, and money cannot exist without debt. Money is created from debt, and debt is money, money's debt, and therefore it's utterly despotic to the human condition because everyone has to be forced into labor to get free of their debt. And of course, it's an illusion because there's no way to ever be free of it. Then I continue this with the second part of section 1, which goes into John Perkins' Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which is a very interesting story about a man who used to work for a private corporation that was affiliated with the World Bank, and his basic disposition his basic realization was that his private corporation was actually a front for this ruse, so to speak, that uses the World Bank as a tool for debt for other countries. So what they do is he would go over, for example, and bribe leaders to take big loans and say, well, if you don't, then there's going to be problems. And those that didn't, there were tremendous problems, overthrown, assassinations. And otherwise, the countries would take the debt and then they'd be enslaved to the Western financial system because all these structural adjustment policies would be put forward on the country because of their outstanding debt, and therefore they would have to give over their natural resources, they would have to submit in multiple ways. So that's the first half of the second film, and then the second half deals with change in an attempt to override all of this stuff. And the essential argument is that the monetary system is not only structurally flawed, because of the first section of the film I deal with the financial system, to the extent where structurally there's not enough money in the system, there's always scarcity, structurally to the extent that the World Bank is in fact very much a despotic, hegemonic institution. But that also bleeds over into the other most important part, which is the psychological manifestation of the monetary system and how it actually relates to our behavior in society, and how we essentially don't know how to relate to each other because we've been conditioned, at least in a civil way, we don't know how to relate to each other in a civil way because the entire system is based on everyone leeching off of everyone else. And it's a very fundamental thing. Most don't think about it that way. That really is the nature of it. So there's a psychological flaw in the system, and as long as this exists, you really can't expect ethical or decent behavior. This goes from, say, a cat burglar, to the invasion of Iraq. It's all the same general train of thought. It's differential advantage and exploitation by one group over another. So then I propose a solution to this core element, and that is this project by a man named Jacques Fresco called the Venus Project, which is essentially a notion of redesigning society from the ground up to make it actually humane, to where as opposed to everyone fighting together, everyone contributes. And it's a very complex thing for me to talk about. It's very long-winded. But essentially, you want to design society for society. You don't want it to be this outdated system that we have today of all sorts of convoluted notions and outmoded structures and political systems and even religions. Not to say religions would be outlawed or anything like that. It's just coming to terms with these understandings about how we interact as human beings. And the things that, updating society to modern day knowledge, both technologically and spiritually, so to speak, because there are many things that we've learned through science that, we don't blame ghosts and demons on people getting sick. We don't do that anymore. But unfortunately, these mentalities still have a general, they still stick, they resonate in society. So there's a superstitious basis, and it's multifaceted. So the advocation is a new social system that not only is structurally designed for society, but advocates in its environmental resonance a new human value system. And in reality, both of these things have to occur at the exact same time. You have to have a human value system cultivate and society cultivate, an environment to be cultivated, because they have to balance each other out. You can't have just one and then the other. So simultaneously, this has to develop, so it's through a process of education and social restructuring that such a system could come to be, and that's what the film advocates very generally. And I'd say that basically encapsulates the whole project. The whole project in general is this. The first film deals with the problems, and then I attempt to get to the core of the problem in the second film, and then present what I feel is at least philosophically, a very decent solution that has so many elements to it that can be expanded upon by other minds and continued forward. The philosophical basis, I think, is quite profound, and I think it's nearly empirical. So
I think you've done a fantastic job on it. I really enjoyed watching it. It was kind of one of those documentaries you watch and you kind of shake yourself down and feel slightly different after watching it. So thank you very much.
Oh yeah, sure. Thank you.
I'm interested to know, talking about the monetary system just for a moment, I think it's really interesting that, I myself didn't know about the fractional reserve system and how that works and so on and so forth, and it was kind of sat there quite aghast. I mean, I have some understanding of it, but, watching that explained quite well. And it kind of led me to think, why don't we, as you point out in the documentary, why don't we as individuals fully appreciate money within the centre of our society? It's obviously fundamental to it. So, I think it would be very helpful for people to sort of be educated in that. Is there anything you might say about sort of the money and why people don't know about it and how they could sort of get to understand it? Or is there any thoughts you might add to that?
Well, I think it's basically goes back to the structure and psychological elements of it. Well, first of all, people don't generally know how money is created. They have no understanding of money. It's just one of those things that exists in the system, and they just live with it. And most have never questioned it. It's a form of faith, and that goes back to its religious connotations, as I had pointed out in the first film. Basically, I would say that people need to learn about what the system is, of course, not only from its structural standpoint, but in psychological standpoint. I think once people wake up to realize, for example, structurally, that you're only as free as your purchasing power will allow you to be. People think we live in a free country or whatever. In the United States, it's a free country, so they say. Well, how is that when you have no choice but to submit yourself to what is essentially a private dictatorship in a corporate structure 40 hours a week on average? How are you free when you literally have to work in some predefined element that you have very little choice to? Some people can be entrepreneurs and make their own way, but still, they're restricted by the structure. So you're only as free as the purchasing power will allow, and most don't consider that. They don't think about that because they've been brainwashed into what the meaning of freedom actually is. On a different point, democracy is another word that's thrown out in our societies. Democracy is basically... There's no such thing as a democracy in a monetary system, especially based on our current monetary system, because the more money you have, the more advantage you can get. And the whole element of an election is how much media coverage you can get, because that's how people learn about you. So if you're a small-time guy with all the great ideas, all the altruism, and the media doesn't like you, for example, in the United States there's a man named Ron Paul who was blacklisted in the media. He really represented all the things that I think really would help things, like shutting down the Fed, eliminating the income tax, and disbanding from all of these larger, really despotic financial structures. But of course, the media has strong affiliations with the corporations. Corporations have strong affiliations with banks and the established political structure. So naturally, anyone who truly wants to help is not going to be able to. So it's not. So the more money you have, the more influence you have, the more funding you get. So it's not only money that someone personally has; it's the money that's given to you. So very simply Barack Obama in the previous campaign versus John McCain. Barack Obama crushed McCain in his overall financing, and I think it's very transparent that it has a strong effect because his capabilities are much more powerful. So anyway, I don't want to go on that tangent, but ultimately what I would say is that the structural system on multifacets is not only a slavery-based system, it's an illusion that has been created to think it's normality to function the way we do, and the psychological ramifications, which people really need to think about, is, again, as I mentioned before, this chiseling off of each other. And I think people need to really understand that about themselves and start to think about their own morality, so to speak, whatever that may be, and how they're literally broken away from their ability to be ethical because you can't be ethical in the system. It's inherently corrupt because the only way you can survive is by gaining differential advantage one way or another over another group or individual. And that's really the absolute foundation of it. So if people think about that, I think they would wake up to the need to get changed, the need for change, and to move out of such a system.
Thank you for that. I'm not sure if you just answered my question, because I wanted to explore, if you will, for a moment, the idea of money. I don't want to go on too long about this, but I, for example, 2 years ago said to myself, I don't care about money anymore. I've actually ditched it, and I value friendships and creativity and other things is far more valuable, actually. What you were just proposing and talking about the Venus projects in regard to different non-finance based economy, essentially, isn't it? It's not using the monetary system. It's kind of using lots of other energies, and I think when you have money at the centre, it very much shapes everything you do. So how do we get? I would love to see a society that's not based upon money. Any thoughts you might share about any insight you have working in producing Zeitgeist, how we might actually get to there from where we are at the moment on money-based system to something that's not maybe so heavily focused on money? Any thoughts you might share on that?
Well, sure. There's numerous steps I think that could be taken. First of all, you could try to eliminate the scarcity in the money supply itself. You could get rid of interest. You could have a non-interest-based system. You could have the governments take over the production of fiat currency, which is, of course, still fake money, but they could make algorithms that would make the money have a relationship to the actual goods and services in the system. And this is something that's really not done whatsoever. In the current system, it's not done at all. It's not, very little mathematical modeling is happening whatsoever. So in other words, you could have a system where it is a medium of exchange, and it doesn't exist in scarcity, which means there's enough to go around, but it's only going to happen to a certain degree. So those things would be helpful because people wouldn't, like the government wouldn't have to pay interest on its loans, and people would have to pay interest on their loans. And that's, of course, very helpful. So I think that's transitional and a good step. But in the end, it's just patchwork because it's still creating competition. It's still people at each other's necks to survive. I think the next thing that needs to happen is the first layers of abundance technologically need to occur. So you would have food, energy, free. You could give it a socialist name, whatever you want to call it. Eventually, there's no reason, based on the amount of abundance and capabilities that we have, the technological ability to create abundance, that we have to have people pay for food. It should be one of those things that, because it's a necessity, and eventually this will be extended. So energy free, food free. How is it free? I mean, basically automation of the systems that create it could be so powerful that you'd have very few people that would need to be employed in it. Those are two very simple things, and eventually it would move to stronger freedom, stronger things distributed for society. Eventually you'd end up with distribution centers to get whatever you needed, because it's just like a factory at a corporation, but it's just everything's there, like a library. You go to a library and you get a book and you return it, and you could go there and get a microwave. Take it. There's no reason to take multiple ones because you can't sell it because there's no money in the system, at least hopefully at the point in time when that's actually an availability. So it's created in abundance, and you could do it in a step-by-step manner. I think it's very feasible to do that. But in the end, it's going to take a larger leap because as long as the human value system, which is another point, doesn't undergo change, you're going to have people that are going to reject this concept for many, many reasons. So simultaneously, you have to have the human value system change at the same time, which is a difficult topic. The transition, to put it very quickly and simply, the transition will have to occur, I think, basically in a step-by-step manner up to a point, and then a big jump will have to happen. Because there's no way to do it perfectly fluidly, because you're always going to have remnants of the old human value system that's going to mess it up. So it might sound very difficult to understand, but I think it's going to take a big shift, and people are going to have to really adjust And I think that's with the financial collapse right now, it's gonna be a catalyst.
Kind of like the 100 Monkeys theory.
Sure.
The 100 Monkey theory, kind of sudden change. So it goes on unseen and untalked about, just then.
Yes, exactly.
I think that would.
And true social change happens very quickly, actually. The real cataclysmic social change, I think, happens very quickly, due to biosocial pressures. So I hope that answers your question.
It does, thank you.
It's a difficult question.
It is,
Transition
very,
what I think about the most, and there's many different angles for it, but essentially you have to just start changing, really, the human value system more than anything else. You have to get rid of this greed mechanism that's constantly perpetuated.
And of course, the media is a great way of doing it. Using Zeitgeist on the internet, it's been seen by how many people?
The first film, I have to say conservatively, is, I say 50 million, but I think it's actually much larger than that. And the new one, I have to say about 3 million so far. So big surge of people initially who watched it. I'm sure will slow down. But
I just wanted to explore with you briefly what led you up to creating Zeitgeist. Why did you do it? Why didn't you just sit there and do whatever it is you fancied doing? Why specifically were you motivated to go and make this?
Well, I think initially the first film came out of a certain degree of angst and an upset disposition with the current power establishment. 9/11 was a very traumatic experience, being in New York, and then slowly going back years later and realizing what actually happened, or at least what seems to have happened. The government story has been proven, I think, definitively to be the conspiracy theory, and I think that's important that people think about, because it shows how far the system wants to go in order to preserve itself. That's the way I see it. Of course, lots of money being made, lots of legal actions based on it, but that was a catalytic point for me. I was like, well, I want to do something for my own conscience. I just felt like doing something. It wasn't that I felt I could actually change anything, but I think people, and I think this is a good point, I think people, when they get to a certain point, they want to do something. They don't want to just be rewarded with money for things that they do. They want something more. I think there's a lot of emptiness in most people, because they have nothing. All they have is their jobs and their money and their families, which of course is important, but there's something missing that is intrinsically flawed. It's a flaw in the system that creates a big gap, because there's an emptiness because of the forced element of the system itself. And not to mention, the destitute, when you realize, say, that the government might be responsible, and there's a history of this type of stuff, of multiple governments doing stuff like this. So 9/11 was a big catalyst for that. I've always studied religion. Religion was always very interesting to me. I studied, very countercultural religion. Started reading things that most people did not read. People from the 1800s that did all these investigative things that was very much suppressed. And then the banking system was sort of an afterthought, because I really hadn't learned much about it until I started realizing, like 9/11, I was like, well, they're making so much money, and I sort of fell into the banking system thinking about it. And then it started changing. The next film came out. I was like, this makes perfect sense. And I think about my life, and I think about all my friends and my family, that you grow up, you have a natural curiosity as a child, and you grow, and suddenly you're slowly oriented through education, and you get through college, you're put in debt, and then you have to find your slot that's pre-existing, usually. That's pre-existing for you to live and survive. So you're basically raped of your general curiosity and ability to be free by the system itself. And I began to ask myself, well, what's the value of most occupations anyway? What's the value of certain people doing, secretaries and working at Kmart and people doing what are basically totally mindless occupations? People say, oh, they have to exist. Well, that's the thing that isn't true. That was what inspired me. Through technology, we don't have to clean out sewers anymore with our hands. We have machines that do this. We don't have to go to the coal mines anymore. We don't have to do tons of things. An automobile production plant, which was considered very dangerous back when all humans were doing it, now is 95% automated. So this is an important revelation, and it's time society shift this focus, and that's why the latter half of Zeitgeist Addendum, I go into this point very specifically, and of course the social design. So it's multifaceted. That was a growth period for me, but I think the initial trigger was 9/11. Honestly, it was that moment I decided to do something. So.
Brilliant, thanks for that. We're all working here on the same sort of premise.
Right.
So is there going to be an addendum 2? Or?
No, I don't think so.
No, what's next for you? What's your next?
I'm not sure. I'm here to advocate the movement now, which is a lot of work. So the website is zeitgeistmovement.com. There's tons of stuff that I have to do to get this up and running. I have a lot of work that will cover years. So my media work is important, my creative work is important, but I'll probably do smaller projects, but I don't think I'll make another feature film for a while. I'm pretty much satisfied with these 2 productions, and there's no reason to just keep it going unless I have something very specific. There's so much stuff that can be supplemental to to these films that doesn't need to occur in a film, needs to occur in information and just tangible stuff, not something as wide as these films are, which is what they are. It raises lots of questions, which is the point. So.
Final question. Do you think our society, Western culture, if you like, other cultures as well, and so on, do you think there's a point to it? Do you think they're trying to achieve? Do you think I say they, I mean we, because I don't believe there is a they and us. I think we are all totally connected in every way. So it's our thing, and I'm looking at one of my things is like the social synapse, how we actually collectively think and manage and process and do work. Do you think our society or societies have an intrinsic idea that they're working to? It's a point. Is there something that society is working toward, in your opinion?
As it exists now? Well, as it exists now, I think it's actually quite paralyzed. I think there's a lot of altruistic notions that are put forward. There's a lot of people that want to see change, but most don't realize that it's the social system that's to blame. They don't really understand that going after all the criminal elements or this and that is really going to change anything. It's you have to do it. You have to be activist oriented to go after these things. But I don't think most realize that they're paralyzed, and that the more they go after and correct things, it's just a matter of time before the same problems keep arising, because it's coming from the actual system itself, which I deviate back to the monetary system. I think deep down there's an aspiration to have human society move forward. I think most would want that. I think most would like a world without war or poverty, but they have no idea how to get that because they don't understand what the real problem is. A lot of people like to blame the they, that they are doing everything, and to a certain extent, of course, there is a they, and they do operate, but we support them. So it's really just we, and we tolerate a whole hell of a lot. The fact that you don't have people up in arms to the extent that they should be over, say, the Iraq War and the slaughter of way over a million people is disgusting. But they don't know what to do, and they feel helpless, and they're in debt. They have to maintain their job. They don't have time to think about world consciousness. And that's another flaw of the system itself. So I think deep down people want change. They want to see a positive world. I don't think there's anyone out there that deep down just wants to see everyone tortured and destroyed. If they do, they're a victim of this culture in a much more aberrant manner. But nevertheless, I think it's positivity is there, but no one knows how to do it.
My take on it is if you take, for example, like a bell-shaped curve and normal distribution. You know about that, right? Yeah. Of course you do. So if you ask most people, what do you think of the current sort of geopolitical situation? What do you think of these wars? What do you think of the way we live in a monetary-based system? I have a general feeling that most people say, no, actually, no, I don't like that. I don't think it's right to treat people, to let people starve, to build nuclear bombs. I think I have a feeling, a thesis that most people say no. So in which case, why do we have it? That therefore explains the inherent fault in the system. Because if you ask people if they want it, they say no. So why have we got it?
I think they've been brainwashed to think it's necessary, even though they know that it seems irrational and ridiculous. To think that we should have bombs that can blow out, a quarter of the surface of the planet, to any thinking mind, obviously that's absolutely nuts. Especially when you realize that if you take all of that technical know-how, all of the scientists, and point them towards something that's actually socially beneficial as opposed to figuring out how to make weapons that are better. If you took all of the military and melted it down and used it for a social design, it'd be unbelievable what we could do. So people just don't understand. They don't understand. They think war is natural. That's all they've known in this structure. So everyone only knows what they've experienced, and it takes a long time for I think a lot of people to realize that you can have a world without any of this stuff. You need to come to terms with what the root causes actually are.
Super finally for me. Just imagine for a moment, this is a global documentary, so we intend to, like yourself, get it out there and get it seen by the 6.7 billion people on this planet. Let's try and do that. So just imagining that's them right here now, just looking through them. They're standing right in front of you, 6.7 billion people, your fellow humans. Any messages to them? Any thoughts that you might say to them? They're right there in front of you.
Well, I say listening to everybody. Well, I'd say that what has to happen is a social awareness on two levels. And it's the most important thing. And the first really does have to come from within us.
Could you do it to camera? Sorry.
What's
just
that?
for consistency.
Oh, sure, okay.
Sorry, so I've got everybody to do this. So they're looking at you.
The first particle of change has to occur within yourself, because until you realize that you're symbiotically connected to nature, and that nature is an emergent process where you have to change constantly, where you realize that you being dogmatic about any point of knowledge is inherently destructive. Once you realize that, you can begin to see a different world where there's ego and bias and all of these things begin to fade, because there's no such thing as static knowledge or information. Everyone has to realize that we are constantly emerging. Our identities are nothing more than temporal positions at that point in time. And the moment people do that, they won't get offended. You will not get offended by, someone challenging your belief system. You will take it as information. And that is an extremely pivotal point for change. And when you learn that, you can actually apply that to social design and see how society can be based on this type of idea as well. Sorry, I'm getting distracted.
You know what? The sound is like fading in and out because of these strong vibrations from outside. It's actually.
Should I just quickly get the door? Do you want to do it very super quickly?
Okay. Should I try it now? Is it? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. What I'd like to say to everybody is that the first thing that has to happen is that you have to realize the emergent and symbiotic aspects of natural law as it applies to you. To realize that everything you think you know is actually undergoing change and will always undergo change. And therefore you can't get hung up on any position, any identity, any thought processes, any belief, because any faith specifically as well. Because the moment you do that, you restrict new information. I think that's the most important thing. And once you realize that you're interconnected with nature symbiotically, it establishes an entirely different worldview. So what I would communicate to everybody out there is that understand the symbiotic and emergent relevance of natural law and how it applies to you. I hope that's okay. I'm really delirious at this point.
I just have one question, and basically it's for Newspace, and it's 1 minute and a half. It's not a documentary.
Oh, okay.
It's for an independent TV station. So the question is basically how in your understanding of what you've been researching with the economic system, how did the credit crunch come about? That's basically it. And if you can say it in like very shortly.
As far as the term credit crunch?
Well, what's going on right now?
Why the money supply is contracting?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so basically, like, for example, I heard credit crunch, and it's like, what's that? I haven't got a clue. I don't understand.
Sure.
So if you could explain to me as someone that hasn't got a clue, but if
Okay, you want me to look at you or look at the camera? Okay. Others ready?
Yeah. Ready.
There are a lot of news agencies talking about a credit crunch that exists in the system right now. And most people, when they hear that term, have no idea what that means. All it really means is that money is contracting. In economics, most economics people will tell you that there's a boom and bust cycle. And all this is expansion of money and contraction of money. So what's happening now is a much larger contraction. So this credit crunch is actually the result of a series of boom and busts that have been going like this, and it's been one big expansion wave. And now it's time for a much larger a contraction wave. And that is what's happening. That's what the credit crunch is. It isn't, bad loans or anything. It means money is disappearing, and that's because of the fractional reserve-based monetary system more than anything else. Cool. I think that's fairly.
Is it actually premeditated, or it just happens by the nature of the?
I believe that I believe that the contraction of the money supply right now is partly anticipated and expected and used for advantage, and one half is actually a result of a Ponzi scheme that has gone too far. I don't pretend to know if someone they knew what they were doing when they created this system. But to the effect that they knew this would happen at this point in time, I don't know. I think they use it to their advantage, but they also know that if they let society collapse, if they let the supply of money contract too much, society's going to get extremely upset. And I don't think they want to lose that type of control So I believe that it's a combination of the Ponzi scheme known as the fractional reserve system and the expectation. And what they're doing, and that expectation is doing whatever they can to capitalize on it through the consolidation of power, and simultaneously trying to really placate the general masses by having them, feel like everything's actually fine. Because if the public really freaks out, then they're going to have a bigger problem on their hands, and whatever gain they might have might actually blow up in their face. As people might say, want a new social design.
So if the panic comes out and no one is actually spending anything, it's not buying Christmas presents, and it's not, taking their money out of the bank, will that be detrimental to them?
Well, it'll be detrimental to the corporations to a certain degree. I think, but they don't. The thing is, people aren't buying things because they don't have the money to do so. There's no availability of money because there's not enough people willing to take on new loans, or there's not enough people willing to do all the attributes that are required. There's not enough jobs available. Jobs are drying up because the resources of larger corporations are drying up because their loan structures are failing as well. So I believe that. So yes, basically it injures the larger elements of the corporations because they need the money to come in because they have their own debt to deal with. Everyone is susceptible to this game on one level or another. But the banks, they have the highest degree. They can manipulate things to a certain degree, but of course they fail too. Now that doesn't mean that the whole system is going to be blown out. Not at all. They keep their bonuses and everything else. They bail out everyone. They're bailing out the automotive industry in America right now. So they do what they have to do. The Federal Reserve is what's called the lender of last resort. It was put in power to deal with this exact problem because they have the ultimate authority of making money out of nothing to bail out all the problems that the fractional reserve system creates. So this is why they're there. This is what they're here for, and that's of course inherently corrupt. So it hurts everybody, but for them it's both a power consolidation and that's basically it. It can preserve their monopoly. They get to absorb smaller banks just like they did in the Great Depression. But then again, they have to walk a fine line because if the public gets too upset, if they really contract the money supply, you're going to have a Great Depression. And I think the establishment really fears an upheaval for social change that could actually override the system. I don't think they're willing to take that risk. So they're going to do their best to keep it afloat as long as they can. I'm of the disposition that they're not going to be able to do it. I think things are going to get a lot worse.
Do you think that it's going to go crash all the way to the ground? We're going to get rid of the finance system? Because that's what I'm hoping for.
Well, I think what they'll probably do is if it crashes to the ground again, if the people don't react the way they should, then they'll restructure the financial system in a much more despotic way. And that's the caveat of the whole thing, which is why this information is so important.
As my good friend Brian says, when shift changes, not all the bases are covered.
Right.
And I think that's a really good point because whilst we're in this transition period of something happening, that you can't have your eye on everything. And I think now's a great time to be alive and to be doing things like Zeitgeist and helping change things. So
thank you.
Well done.
Good.
Cool. Really appreciate that.
Oh, sure. I wish I was a little more alive. I've had
It's amazing, man.
I'm really dying.
You can definitely officially go and have a sit down now.
Can you also say something about the connection that people should find with nature?
To you right now?
Yeah.
Or on camera?
Yeah, for the camera, perhaps.
Well,
because I could maybe use it in.
I really kind of have to go.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I'll say something real fast. The connection as far as the symbiotic connection?
Yeah.
Well, the symbiotic connection of nature is very important because it's very lost in our traditional belief systems. Religions, for example, they have this particular arrogance to think that we're separate as human beings. We have the soul, and our life here is, this testing ground to see if we're going to go to heaven or hell, and things like this. This really detracts from our actual true connectivity to nature, which we're a part of. There's no difference between me and a flower, and to think anything otherwise is utterly arrogant. Life is not just we think we're solid in this form, but we're not. There's tons of things around us that have a direct influence on us. We meld in many different ways. We are affected by the atmosphere. So we are absolutely connected on many, many vast levels. And electronically, our brains are frequency connections. The reason that we see each other is because we are tapped into the same type of frequency. So there's tons of connectivity that people need to realize. And the most important is that when it comes to nature, to the fact that we are connected to nature, and that means everything that nature has, including nature's laws, it creates an entirely new belief system, entirely new approach to life. Once you realize that you're connected to each other, for example, if I realize I'm connected to you, I'm much less likely to behave aberrantly towards you. But if I realize I'm connected to the water and to the planet, I'm much less likely not to say, go pee in the stream I'm drinking from, I'm much less likely to destroy the environment, in other words. So people don't think that way. The corporations go and they destroy everything because they don't recognize this. They don't see that they're peeing in the swimming pool that they get everything from. Or that's a bad analogy, but that they're swimming in, whatever. So the symbiotic connection of nature is probably the most important realization people can have, because that's what's been lost for centuries. The Greeks had it right a long time ago, and somehow they didn't have everything correct, and we don't have everything correct either, but somehow it was really lost during the Dark Ages when all these other religions came to be. So I think the oneness, to realize that there's no such thing as independence, and that really is a representation of this symbiotic connection on multiple levels, is one of the most important things that people can consider, because it makes all of us the same. It makes us the same with everything else. Therefore, we're interconnected, and you have this sort of unconditional love for things because you realize your integrity is only as good as the integrity of everything else around you.
Thank you.
Sure.